So I'm standing in the ruins of ancient Shechem.
The greatest moments in biblical archaeology are when you have something that is described in the Bible, and then that very thing is dug up and found through archaeology. This is the story of just such a discovery. This stone is in the Bible.
That's amazing! That just blows my mind.
So it really helps me and my team if you're willing to hit that subscribe button. I'll leave a link in the description where you can order a copy of my book, Where God Came Down, the Archaeological Evidence. Thanks for making it #1 in archaeology. I'll also leave a link for anyone that's interested in leaving a donation. These really help in the production of future videos. Located in the heart of the Bible's Promised Land, about 35 miles north of Jerusalem are two large mountains. Mount Gerizim is the southernmost of the two, while Mount Ebal is just to the north. In Deuteronomy chapter 27, Moses is instructing the Israelites about what they are to do when they enter the land of Canaan. Moses names 6 tribes, commanding that these tribes shall stand on Mount Gerizim to bless the people. Moses then names 6 more tribes, saying, "And these tribes shall stand on Mount Ebal to pronounce curses." This event takes place in Joshua chapter 24 with the covenant renewal at Shechem, when Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem. The city of Shechem is located in the valley between Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, and its ancient mound, known locally as Tel Balata, was first excavated by the Germans under the directorship of Ernst Sellen, who began in 1913 by digging along a large section of the city wall. In 1926, Sellen unearthed what he described as a water trough cut out of a gigantic rock. In it lay transversely a monolith.
In 1926, the German archaeologist Ernst Sellen was excavating right in this area, and he unearthed this massive stone here. He saw that it was a carved stone. It's not complete. It would have stood quite tall back in ancient times when it was complete, but he saw that this was and interpreted it as a sacred standing stone called a matzebah in Hebrew. When Sellen excavated the sacred standing stone at Shechem, he found it broken. We're at a different Canaanite city, and we have this sacred Canaanite standing stone that is intact, and this lets us know what that Shechem standing stone would have looked like in ancient times. He also found right in the same area this massive stone with a trough carved into the top of it, and he interpreted that to be a watering trough for animals. This was 1926. In 1928, he continued to find these types of stones, but he began to question his interpretation, because if you see this slot here, it wouldn't be able to hold water. And so he wondered if maybe he had misinterpreted it. And he continued to find these. So you can see from this stone here why he would have thought originally that this was a watering trough. However, he found another standing stone next to this one, and all of a sudden he got an idea. And he had his men lift up the sacred stone and then put it into this trough, and it fit perfectly. And that's when he realized that these were not watering troughs. They were the foundational stone bases to these sacred stones so that they could stand upward. So then, once he realized that, he went back to the largest of the sacred stones that he had found in his excavations in 1926, this one, and this giant base that he had originally thought was a watering trough. It's underneath here right now, and he had his men lift this huge stone and put it into that base, and again, the two fit perfectly. And so we have, in this area, this largest, most predominant sacred standing stone and its base.
This picture was taken of Sellen's excavations in 1926. It shows the huge stone that Sellen found, and in front of it were the remains of an altar covered with the bones from sacrifices. And then in front of this was the entrance into a monumental building that Sellen identified as a temple.
So when Selin was excavating in this area, another thing that he found was a sacrificial altar right here where sacrifices were made. And all of this was right in front of a massive temple. And the entrance of that temple is right here.
So the workmen for Selin's excavation came across these sacred stones and they didn't know what they were. And so they broke them up with a sledgehammer. And so there were sacred stones standing on the north and south of the entrance to the temple. The one on the north was completely destroyed and is missing to this day. The one on the southern side of the entrance, Selin came along as the workmen were breaking this stone up, and he only managed to salvage the very bottom of that sacred stone, which you can see today at the site in its base. Based on the archaeology and top plans from excavation reports, the temple can be reconstructed. The massive sacred stone stood before the altar that was in front of the temple entrance, where two additional sacred stones stood on either side. The inside of the temple building was divided into two rooms.
So this is the entrance of this temple that comes back in this first room. Then we have pillars across here, and then we have the backside of this temple and massive walls all the way around. Now, this temple is often referred to as a fortress temple or even a tower temple. And the reason why is because of how massive its walls are. These walls of a building, keep in mind, this is the inner part of that wall, and they go all the way over here, roughly 17 feet to the outer part of the wall. These are as big or bigger than the actual city walls of Shechem. Now, it's understood in archaeology that the broadness of a wall has to do with how tall that building is. And so it's understood here from the archaeologists that this was a multi-storied building that these massive wide walls supported. And so that's why you sometimes read about this temple as being a tower temple.
This reconstruction drawing from a later Shechem excavation report shows the temple being 4 stories tall. As a member of the German team that was digging at Shechem was Dr. Gabriel Welter, and he believed that this monumental building was a fortress. And so when Selin changed his interpretation that these were water troughs and over to these are the bases of sacred stones and that this is a temple, then Welter had a very strong reaction to that. He was completely against that. Not only did Selin believe that this was a sacred stone and a temple, but he believed that this was the very sacred stone and temple that is described in the Bible in the book of Judges in chapters 8 and 9. And so I'll get to how that interpretation was made by Selin and the evidence for it. But before we do, we need to understand this escalation of the conflict on this excavation between Selin and Welter. In fact, Welter was away from the site when Selin set these sacred stones up in their bases, and he was actually doing a power play where he managed to oust Selin from being the director of the dig. And so when Welter returned to Shechem and to the excavation, then Selin was out and Welter was now in charge as the new director of the dig. What happened next was written down by Dr. Schmidt, a scholar associated with the dig. Schmidt wrote, "A few weeks later, Dr. Welter arrived and was furious to see the erected matzebahs. He had them therefore taken out of their sockets and thrown down the slope of the fill."
This was the case, then Welter toppled this sacred stone. He was very disgusted with the interpretation, which was a biblical interpretation. He totally disagreed with it, so he toppled the sacred stone and took the sacred stone and the stone base to that stone and hurled them off of this platform down into the square that Selin had earlier dug, which is east of the temple.
Another witness to this was the renowned American archaeologist W.F. Albright, who wrote, "I was then in Palestine and saw the stone after it had been set up by Selin where it had been found, and also after Welter had dumped it into the neighboring trench. It was broken further in the process." it becomes all the more disturbing what Welter did when we go to the Bible and realize how significant this stone that was damaged further by Welter is. This stone is in the Bible.
In Judges chapters 8 and 9 we read, "No sooner had Gideon died than the Israelites again prostituted themselves to the Baals. They set up Baal-berith as their god and did not remember the Lord their God. The citizens of Shechem were inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, 'He is related to us.' They gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal-berith. Then all the citizens of Shechem and Beth Milo gathered beside the great tree at the pillar in Shechem to crown Abimelech king."
So how much more clear can the evidence for the Bible be than here at Shechem? I mean, you're talking about Judges 8 and 9 talking about this pillar of Shechem, this sacred stone, and this temple. And then Selin comes along and excavates, and what does he find? He finds this pillar of Shechem, this sacred stone with the temple associated with it. Not only this, but it dates to the same time period as Judges chapters 8 and 9, which is the 12th century BC. So we have a match in date, we have a match in what was found, and we have this amazing correlation at Shechem between the Bible and the archaeology. What Selin found at Shechem is a great example of how biblical archaeology works. If you take the Bible out of it, then what do we know about this building? What do we know about these stones? Very, very little. It's when you bring the Bible in that all of a sudden these stones come to life, because you know the events that surround these stones. You know what happened in this building. You know the name of this building. If you didn't have the biblical text, then you would look at this temple and this stone and you would think Canaanite. But when you look at what the text says, keep in mind, this is not a Canaanite standing stone. It says in the text that the Israelites set up a god named Baal-berith. And the temple was for the worship of this god. This is not a Canaanite temple. This is an Israelite temple. And Abimelech is the son of Gideon. He's an Israelite, and he's crowned king next to this sacred stone. And so are we to think of Abimelech as the first king of Israel, that the temple at Shechem is the first temple in Israel? No, because this is a false god, and therefore it's an illegitimate temple and an illegitimate king. And this is why Abimelech is killed, and before that, this is why the temple, this Israelite temple that's illegitimate, is destroyed by fire.
In Judges 9, Abimelech turns against the citizens of Shechem, and it says, "On hearing this, the citizens in the tower of Shechem went into the stronghold of the temple of El-berith. When Abimelech heard that they had assembled there, so all the men cut branches and followed Abimelech. They piled them against the stronghold and set it on fire with the people still inside. So all the people in the tower of Shechem, about 1,000 men and women, also died."
When Selin was excavating this temple at Shechem, he got to the destruction layer within that temple, which was this massive burn layer. This temple had been destroyed by fire, just as the Bible describes. After the Germans finished their excavations, beginning in 1956, a new excavation started called the Drew-McCormick excavations, and these were mainly directed by the well-known biblical archaeologist G. Ernest Wright. Now, the layer of the temple that was destroyed by fire, Wright called that Temple 2B, and he agreed with Selin that this is the temple that is in Judges chapters 8 and 9. Not only that, but he also agreed with him about the date of that temple, that it dated to the 12th century BC, which is the same time period as the events that happen in the book of Judges chapters 8 and 9. So G. Ernest Wright followed the interpretations and agreed with the interpretations of Selin and rejected the interpretations of Welter.
Wright wrote, "From the Abimelech story is the statement that within the city there was a temple, the house of El-Berith, which was also destroyed. The reference here, without serious question, is to the structure which we have designated Temple 2B. In Judges 9, therefore, we have a most important correlation between the archaeological discoveries and biblical tradition." Ernest Wright and his team called the largest sacred standing stone that Selin found Matzeba 1, and he wrote of it, "The tradition about Joshua's great stone is probably related to Matzeba 1. Wright's excavation staff members Edward Campbell and James Ross agreed when they wrote, "As for this pillar, it is most probably the Matzeba of the Late Bronze Temple, and if so, identical with Joshua's great stone."
These scholars associated with the Drew-McCormick excavation not only agreed with Ernst Selin and his interpretation that this is the sacred stone talked about in the book of Judges, but they also believed that since it was the one that was in the book of Judges, it also is the very identical stone, Joshua stone, that is discussed in Joshua chapter 24.
In Joshua 24, Joshua said to the people, "You are not able to serve the Lord. He is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your rebellion and your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, He will turn and bring disaster on you and make an end of you after He has been good to you." And the people said to Joshua, "We will serve the Lord our God and obey Him." Then he took a large stone and set it up, there under the oak near the holy place of the Lord. "See," he said to the people, "this stone will be a witness against us. It will be a witness against you if you are untrue to your God." In Deuteronomy 27, Moses commands the Israelites, "You shall set up large stones and plaster them with plaster, and you shall write on them all the words of this law when you cross over to enter the land the Lord your God is giving you."
When you look at the stone that Selin found, unfortunately it's broken, but the large portion that remains, you can see how intricately it's carved. It was carved to stand upright, and it's been intentionally smoothed. And so it makes sense that the reason for that is so that it could be plastered with plaster and that it could be written on. This is how it's the witness stone. It's got the covenant written on it. The laws of the covenant. So in the future, if an Israelite wants to know more about the covenant that he's part of, then he can go back to Shechem, the place where the covenant was renewed, and he can go to the witness stone and see the terms of the agreement between Yahweh and Israel written on that stone.
The interpretation of Wright and his team was based on the obvious correlations between Joshua chapter 24 and the later events covered in Judges chapters 8 and 9. In Joshua 24, at Shechem, Joshua took a large stone and set it up under an oak near the holy place of the Lord. Centuries later, the pillar in Shechem is described beside the great tree at a temple called both Baal-Berith and El-Berith. In Hebrew, Berith means covenant. Baal means Lord, and El means God. Therefore, the names of the temple at Shechem means Lord of the Covenant and God of the Covenant. Despite the meaning of the name Baal-Berith, it is not to be confused with the true covenant God of Israel, because it's said of the Israelites that they prostituted themselves when they set up Baal-Berith as their God, and that they did not remember the Lord their God.
And this, amazingly, is the stone that Selin found in his excavations at Shechem.
I mean, this is just what it's all about, that we could read something in the Bible, read about something specific like a sacred stone, and then all these thousands of years later, somewhere around 3,400 years later, we can come here to Shechem and dig and find and see the actual stone that is being talked about in Joshua chapter 24, that was a witness to the covenant that was renewed here between Yahweh and the Israelites in Shechem. I mean, that's amazing. That just blows my mind.
How significant is this stone that is in the Bible in multiple places? And so now it becomes all the more disturbing to realize that Dr. Welter damaged this stone further when he took it from its original place where it was found and hurled it down into a deep pit.
Dr. Wright wrote, "And that was where we found them. and with great difficulty and rented equipment managed to drag Matzeba 1 and its socket back on top of the reconstructed court. We set them up again.
So I am standing in a hole east of the temple. This is where Dr. Welter threw the sacred stone in its base. In 1960, the archaeologist G. Ernest Wright found the stone and its base down here and realized how significant the sacred stone was. It's a stone that's in the Bible. And so he started a salvage project to get this sacred stone and its base out of this hole and back up to the original place where it had been discovered in 1926 by Sellon. They put the base down and were able to heave the rock back up and put it in its base and then cement it in. And as you can see, it stands here to this day. So one thing that's interesting to me about this sacred stone that is mentioned in the Bible is that it's found broken. And this is fitting because think about what it says in the Bible about this stone. In Joshua 24, Joshua sets it up because the Israelites are making a covenant with the Lord that they will worship Him and obey Him alone. And then just a few centuries later in Judges chapter 9, what are the Israelites doing? They're actually worshiping the witness stone as a false god. It's a broken witness stone to a broken covenant.
This stone that is still standing at Shechem to this day, even though it's got spray paint on it, man. Anyways, the stone that's standing there to this day really represents and shows how biblical archaeology works. Without the Bible, we wouldn't know anything about it. Nobody would care. With the Bible, we have this historical portrait of what has happened to this stone down through the years and how it connects to the biblical account. And it becomes something truly profound. It's not looking at the ruins at Shechem that makes you go, wow. It's actually the Bible and what it has to say about it. And then the realization that this evidence is left behind from those events that makes you go, wow. So what is the archaeological test for the reliability of the Bible? Well, a main one is that when we have details that are in the biblical description that are then found, those very things, in the excavations at a site, and we have this perfect match between the Bible and what it says and the archaeology that was found, then that shows the reliability of Scripture. You have the Bible as history because back at the time when these events are happening, it's telling you what happened, and then the things that have been left behind from those events are then dug up and found through archaeology. This is biblical archaeology. That's why biblical archaeology is made up of two words, Bible and archaeology. This is how they work together. And what was found by Sellon in the excavations of Shechem, especially in the sacred standing stone, is a perfect example of that.
All of us inside are broken, and we need to be restored. And the only Israelite that ever lived his life perfectly in covenant with the Lord is the Messiah, Yeshua, Jesus in English. And so Jesus is the one who came and died for us so that our sins and our unfaithfulness could be forgiven, so that we could be restored into right relationship with God.
Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I'll leave a link where you can order a copy of my book, Where God Came Down, the Archaeological Evidence. I'll also leave a link where any of you that might be interested in giving a donation to the production of future videos, that would be greatly appreciated and helpful. Also, for any of you that are interested in studying biblical archaeology from a Bible worldview, then I highly recommend a program at Shepherd's Theological Seminary for you to do that. And so I'll leave a link in the description for that as well. You can watch another video here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.